Jim Apologetics. This is, of course, your host, Jim. Today we're going to be talking about the heresy of Apollinarianism. What is it? Where was it founded? Why was it founded? And how does it impact proper Christology and Trinitarian theology? So Apollinarianism was begun by Apollinaris of Laodicea and was deemed heretical in the year 381 AD. His idea of Christology was actually a heresy that stemmed originally from monophysitism. Monophysitism is the idea that Christ only has one nature, rather than two natures as we believe in Orthodox theology. In Orthodox theology, we believe that Christ has two natures, one man and one God. That's why he's fully man and fully God, not partially either and not only one. These two separate natures dwell within Christ. Monophysitism is the idea that Christ only has one nature, which is a mixture of the divine and the man nature. Now, there are many Oriental Orthodox Christians who may disagree with that definition or may disagree that their own theology teaches that, and that's a subject for another time. But the strict definition of monophysitism is only one nature. Apollinarianism descends from monophysitism, so it comes from these ideas, but it is its own heresy. And the heresy of Apollinarianism, specifically, is that Christ only had a divine mind. So the mind of the Logos overtook the human mind. Now, Apollinaris was not a Gnostic. He didn't believe that Christ had zero body and was just floating around as a spirit, as they would say in their own theology. However, he did say that even though Christ had a human body and a sensitive human soul, he did not have a human mind, and that the human mind was completely overshadowed by the mind of the divine Logos. Like I said, this heresy was deemed wrong and heretical in the year 381 AD, and it does come from the idea of monophysitism, so one nature, although it completely embarks on a different path. Now, we know that there are many people who, even if they decline it, we as Orthodox would accuse them of practicing monophysitism in this world. So has Apollinarianism survived in any form in this world at all? I would argue no. There are some people who you could argue are neo-Apollinarianists, meaning that they have a poor understanding of Christology, and so they may accidentally support the idea of Apollinarianism without really knowing it. But I don't think that there are really any Christians who would walk up and tell you, I follow Apollinarian Christianity. And there are no denominations or sects which would admit that either. And there are none that survive to this day. So it actually died out pretty quickly. There's another one that goes along with Apollinarianism, which is known as Eutychianism. And Eutychianism we'll cover in the next episode. But the reason that this is wrong theologically, is first of all, we can just look at the scripture of the New Testament, which in many places we can see that Christ has the ability to think as a human man. So whether or not you're arguing with an Apollinarian, there are people who would argue, based on the Trinity and Christology, that there are many things God cannot do. I don't know how many times I've spoken to someone with Unitarian theology, someone who is Muslim, Jewish, or even a strange heretical Unitarian Christian, or someone aspiring and who's not religious at all, who would say, well, God can't do this and that, God cannot do this, God cannot sleep, God cannot eat. And those are all negations of what God truly can do. And in fact, you would be implying that God is not all-powerful if he is incapable of doing these things. I mentioned this in my video on the Theotokos and the heresy of Nestorianism, which, again, these all have to do with Christology. Most of the heresies that the church dealt with were all Christological in nature. Who is Christ? How is Christ? What is Christ? And so there are many false ideas that sprung up, some of them with decent intentions, some without. So with Apollinaris of Laodicea was attempting to reject the ideas of Arianism, but he went a step too far. So another heresy, the heresy of Arianism, is that Christ was a later created being and was almost like a lesser demigod, but is not God and is not one with the Father and is not uncreated and eternal, as we Christians believe. So going against the idea that Christ could be almost a semi-mortal, he's essentially a created angelic being who is not immortal, who has not been around forever in Arianism. Apollinaris went the exact opposite route and said, well, you know what, he doesn't even have a human mind, so that way no one can call him a created human being or a pre-existent but still created being. But we can see that sometimes exaggerating to go against one heresy ends up in another heresy. And it could almost be argued even that monophysitism is itself a overreaction to Nestorianism. So Nestorianism is the idea that Christ had two natures, but that they were so separated that the Virgin Mary did not give birth to Christ the God, but rather gave birth to just Christ the man. And that's why they referred to her as Christotokos rather than Theotokos. Again, it can be debated whether anybody actually follows this theology today. Even the churches that claim to be Nestorian, I don't think they follow this exact theology. They may say Christotokos simply as a cultural or liturgical tradition, but I don't think they actually believe in Nestorianism. And you know what? It could be argued that neither did Nestorius. But we're getting off topic here. Nestorianism said that the natures were so separate that they weren't even together, so that when the Virgin Mary, like I said, gave birth, she wasn't giving birth to God. So Theotokos, God-bearer, is just Christ-bearer for them. And it could be argued that monophysitism was a harsh reaction against that. And if you read some of the writings of the Oriental elders from over 1,500 years ago, they are viewing the Council of Chalcedon and all Chalcedonian Christians who believe in the two natures as a resurrection of Nestorianism. So, this Nestorian heresy is back. We had better reject it. And that's where the over-exaggeration of monophysitism came from. So to round that all back to what we were talking about, Apollinarianism is a similar subject. Apollinarius saw the filth and heresy of Arianism, which, like we said, purported that Christ was a created being, and went the total opposite direction, saying, no, he's not created at all. He's the pre-existent Logos. He didn't even have a human mind. The Logos overtook that mind, and now that's a step too far. So he was correct in rejecting Arianism. He was correct in wanting to refute Arianism, but incorrect in how far and how exaggerated his theology would eventually go. And that's one thing that we can look at in the long list of heresies, and many of them bounce off each other. You have Nestorianism, then you have monophysitism. From monophysitism, you have Apollinarianism, which itself is a rejection of Arianism. Then you have Eutychianism, which we'll get into in another episode, and so on and so forth. These heresies keep popping up all over the place, and many of them, thankfully, are so unpopular that you can essentially call them extinct theologies. I mean, one could argue that even though there are a lot of people, and by a lot I mean probably a handful of thousands, who follow Arianism, and again, when I say people who follow Arianism, I mean people who consciously know they're following Arianism and call themselves an Arian. There's not that many of them on Earth. There may be a lot of evangelicals in America, according to a recent poll, that unintentionally follow Arianism, meaning they don't know this is a heresy, they genuinely think that Christ is not God. That's the problem with Protestantism, which we'll get into in another episode. But as for people who actually follow Arianism consciously, there's not that many of them. So it could be claimed that Arianism itself had become extinct and then was brought back. And in the age of the internet, a lot of people discover many interesting things. But thankfully, heresies like Apollinarianism are extinct, and anyone who claims to follow it becomes a neo-Apollinarianist. Eutychianism and all the other heresies are pretty much extinct as well. The only big ones that have survived would be monophysitism, and then of course the Protestant Reformation, which was a heresy based on Catholicism, and in the Orthodox view, the split in 1054 and the rise of Papism and Roman Catholicism is itself a heresy. So to say that there are no heresies and life is good is wrong. We're still dealing with heresies today, although they're of a completely different idea. All the major Christological heresies were settled in the first few hundred years after Christ's ascension and the beginning of the Christian church. So those were some growing pains. Now, the heresies of today, that's a different subject, but the heresies of the Middle Ages and onward were more about the disagreement between the Latin and the East. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick summation of Apollinarianism, monophysitism, and the rise of so many heresies. I'm going to get into a longer stream, or actually I've never done a live stream, but one day I'll do a live stream, and I'm going to get into a longer session on all the heresies, where we're going to discuss all of them, and what they do, and why they bounce off each other, and how they are untrue. So we'll get more deeply into that. We'll talk about Eutychianism as well. And then I am going to be doing a long, much longer session on Arianism and all related Arian subjects. Thank you for watching. If you have any subjects you want me to cover, don't be afraid to list them in the comment section. If you don't want to, or you want to have a personal discussion with the Gene, then check out my Discord. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can email me. All those links should be in my About, and I'm going to add a link tree so that you can just click that instead of seeing all the separate links. But yeah, hit me up on Discord. I'm good for a talk, and we can even do a voice chat if anybody would like to. But I am fishing for new subjects to talk about. So if you have something very cool that you think I may be knowledgeable on, give it a try, and if it's a good subject that I can really sink my teeth into, I will talk about it. So until then, God bless you guys. This has been a Gene Apologetics session, and I'll talk to you later.